Hi, this is Dan Valeri, retired electronics engineer out on the front deck of my houseboat again. I have another animation I wanted to show you. When I first looked at phases of distorted sine waves, I couldn't believe my eyes. I was getting routinely 0, 90, 180, and 270 degrees relative to the fundamental. Now this is in simulation because it's hard to do. Hello, geese. It's hard to do capture a wave that's perfectly aligned to your trigger that starts up your digitizer. But you can take a look at LinkedIn. I've done a number of articles that show how you can compensate for that, and it's really easy. You know, you capture the sine wave and then you just shift it over to the left or to the right, whichever you need to do, and you might find yourself off by a little tiny bit, but I even wrote an article on how to deal with that. When I was figuring this stuff out, I got a hold of my buddy Daver, and I said, hey, can you check this out, because he knows how to simulate all this stuff. And he looked at it and he said, no, I can't confirm it. It's not, you're wrong. And I'm like, Daver, come on, man, you're my go-to guy for this. What the fuck? And so he said, well, you know, here's what I have. And I looked at it and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's a cosine wave. I did all my simulations with sine waves. He did all the simulations with cosine waves. And guess what he was getting? He was getting 0 degrees and 180 degrees for all his harmonics. So I realized that my law wasn't going to work because it only applies for sine waves. Daver's law, which I came to name it, applies to cosine waves. And so if you can line it up to be a cosine wave, which is really the way to go, you only have 2 phases to worry about, 0 and 180. But, you know, I had a hard time believing it. And so I tried every possible crazy distortion I could do. So what I do, remember, I don't just go in and add distortion to a sine wave. I have a VLOOKUP table that I use. It's a 10,001 point VLOOKUP table, and when I go to make the sine wave, I create the sine wave in Excel, and then I use VLOOKUP to go look in the VLOOKUP table to figure out what to do with that value. So for each point in the sine wave, it goes to the VLOOKUP table, which is why it takes so long. Now, I tried every distortion I could think of, and here's the result. Everything I could do, I could throw anything and everything at it, and I never got phases with a cosine wave. I never got phases other than 0 and 180 degrees. That's a scatter plot going across the bottom of the phases, all the phases from DC to F sub S. But one of the advantages, somebody emailed me today that said you really need to use Linux if you want it to go faster and do the FFT there. I'm like, with what? One of the huge advantages, despite the fact that Excel is incredibly slow, one of the cool things I really like about Excel when you do an FFT is that it gives you DC to F sub S. If you do an FFT on 2048 samples, you get the FFT is 2048 points long. And so you have to realize that after the first half, if it's a 2048 wave, the first half is valid, and then the rest are not invalid, they're aliases. And if you can track aliases like I can, it works really good. You save yourself a lot of time. When I was doing this stuff early on, I did all this stuff and I kept thinking, why are my spectra at 2048? Shouldn't they be at 1024? Because I'm running with 2048 samples on my sine wave. And I kept thinking, I must have made a mistake. And then I remembered, oh yeah, I figured this out some time ago. So it's a real big advantage if you understand aliasing. But remember, I did a video on how to use aliasing. I'm a big fan of aliasing. That's my, you know, if I were a one-trick pony, and I'm not, but if I were a one-trick pony, aliasing would be my trick. So anyway, I think this is a really cool animation. And it doesn't matter what you do to the waveform, as long as you're phase aligned to the fundamental. Then if you use this cosine wave, the phases are 0 and 180 degrees. Phases of all the harmonics, every harmonic is 0 and 180. But if you do a sine wave, it's 0, 90, 180, and 270. Now, if you're trying to do like I did this article, I did a number of articles saying that using THD is stupid, but measuring THD by just assuming that all multiples of the fundamental are harmonics, that's stupid too, because you can do an FFT and then look at the phases of the harmonics, what you think might be harmonics, and if the phases fit with 0, 90, 180, or 270, or better yet, 0 and 180, because it's easier to work that out, then you can be sure that what you're looking at is a harmonic. And when you do an FFT in real life, like I have done many, many, many millions of times, then you'll find out that you're going to get things to pop up that are not like in a good place for you, and they may not be harmonics. They may be something else. Anyway, this is Dan Bullard from the river. See you later.